Subject matter.
I'm Lisa Senecal.
And I'm Maya May, and We're Speaking starts now.
Hi, everybody.
Hi.
Maya and I are just going to dance our way through the disaster that is our current state of being. So you caught us.
Yeah. This is what I'm doing. Actually, I start all my mornings now dancing because it's the only way to get through. I highly, highly recommend it.
Yeah,
I do.
Music's incredibly important. At some point, we'll do a show on the way music affects memory or affects mood, because it's super, super important. And that's a go-to place when you need to be able to pull yourself back up.
Yes.
Is put on that music that makes you feel good.
Yes.
Yeah, because we're not all feeling so good right now. Country's feeling a little sick. Democracy is unwell, to say the least. The right-wing extremists who, they used to be kind of this ugly undercurrent in the party. Mm-hmm. They're now literally today screaming from the floor of the House, with Marjorie Taylor Greene giving a big old attaboy to Paul Gosar after he got censured. So, crazy's gone mainstream. Autocracy's gone mainstream in the Republican Party, but this might all be by design.
That's exactly right. By design. You can't end up right here without some planning. And it seems like there was some planning that was involved decades ago, sounds like. And it might sound like the plot of the worst QAnon blog post. It truly, it's like the tale that's been woven. It's no, that can't really be is that how we got here? But our guest tonight, she is an expert on the intersection of gender, religion, and politics. And this all is interwoven. She has a story to tell about how the white evangelical faith train, we're calling it, has derailed our democracy.
Yeah, in her best-selling book, Jesus and John Wayne, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation, our guest, Kristin Kobes Du Mez, digs into this really fascinating and incredibly troubling history of how 14% of the population have come to make decisions for all of us.
Yeah, it is not pretty, as you have seen this week. We have a lot to untangle, so let's check out the latest edition of The Last Week in the Republican Party.
The idea that a woman doesn't need a man to be successful, the idea that a woman can live a happy and fulfilling life without a man, I think it's all nonsense.
Masculinity is under attack in this country, and men are withering and dying as a result of this.
From an evolutionary standpoint, it used to be, women were attracted to your strength because you could defend them from dinosaurs.
We're going to get to the bottom of 3 November, and we're going to decertify the electors, because not only we're winning on a massive scale.
Steve Bannon, close Donald Trump ally, has just been indicted.
8 times as many people die of cold-related temperatures than heat-related temperatures. So while it may be true that surface temperatures rise, actually the question is whether that's actually a bad thing for saving human lives.
And there was a wisdom in what Richard Nixon said approximately 40, 50 years ago. The professors are the enemy.
Eliminate the U.S. Department of Education.
What conservatives, or any individual with a thinking brain, is upset about, and what we are responding to, is the big pharma pervert dressed up as Big Bird.
Big Bird is literally hawking an unnecessary vaccine for children.
It's perverse, brainwashing filth. These are child predators looking to persuade children to take action without the advising consent of their parent.
Big Bird has been doing PSAs on vaccines. You got to go all the way back to 1972. So this isn't a new thing at all. And I think in reporting this, that should be noted.
Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama and all of them know that they chose the loser. They chose Satan.
So if we are going to have one nation under God, which we must, we have to have one religion, one nation under God and one religion under God, right?
Mike Lindell! People in the upper deck, Mike Lindell!
I'm wearing this in honor of Big Bird, actually. This is my Big Bird support.
Excellent. This is the masculine ideal. Mike Lindell, Tucker Carlson, Steve Bannon. They're like at the bottom of the gene pool talking about how they're going to save masculinity.
Yeah, if masculinity is under attack and they're the ones defending it, I too am worried about masculinity, if that's the case. So
yeah, and the role of men used to be to protect women from dinosaurs. Like
in Jurassic Park, maybe.
Yeah. The only dinosaurs that women need protection from are guys like the idiot who thinks that women and men and humankind was around when the dinosaurs were. It's just, the stupidity is next level, but it's still scary. The kind of stuff that Flynn was saying about having one religion in the nation, that's scary, unconstitutional, anti-American shit.
It certainly is. And our guest tonight, the best-selling author of Jesus and John Wayne, which is an amazing title, How White Evangelicals Corrupted a Faith and Fractured a Nation. She's a professor at Calvin University, where her research focuses on all of this. So excited to have her here tonight. Hello, Kristin. Welcome to We're Speaking.
Hi, thanks for having me. And yes, what a week.
What a week.
Yeah, we say that every week, and somehow each week just outdoes the previous one. It's really staggering, but we are thrilled to have you here to talk with us tonight. And we know you've been doing a lot of moving around, so thank you for managing to make it here. It's an
my
important
pleasure.
conversation for us to have.
Thank you.
So just to dive right in, statistically, white evangelicals, they only make up a small portion of the US population. But I think it's important before we start to kind of define what they believe. In your book, you talk about it, the four sort of like, these are the tenets of their belief.
Yeah, so range between, in recent years, 26% down to 15%. It's hard to get a precise number because there's no agreed upon definition for what an evangelical is. So evangelical leaders will like to insist that there's a theological set of beliefs, things like biblicism, the authority of the Bible, the centrality of the cross of Christ, and the born-again experience, these sorts of things. But in my research, I came to understand that evangelicalism is not primarily a theology or a set of doctrines. It's a cultural movement and a cultural and political movement. It's a consumer culture. There's a whole world that exists of Christian radio, not just churches and organizations, Christian publishing. And so I look at evangelicalism as the degree to which people are immersed in that world, shaped by that value system. And theology is a part of it, but it's not the only part at all.
Well, that's so interesting that you describe it as a more of a culture than just theology, because you have said that with the demographic shifts in America, white evangelical leaders find that democracy is no longer strategic. Can you talk to us about what you mean by that?
Yes. So, we're in this demographic shift, as Robert Jones has called it, the end of white Christian America. And the majority of conservative evangelicals hold to Christian nationalist beliefs, right? The idea that America was somehow founded as a special Christian nation and received God's special blessing, but they've fallen away. And so it's up to them to restore Christian America, to make America Christian again, and to make America great again. And that's kind of one of their core beliefs. And as long as white Christians are in the majority, you can work within the democratic process to achieve that. Mm-hmm. Now that they're looking at no longer having that majority rule isn't quite so attractive anymore. And that's actually this precarious position that we find ourselves in right now, where mainstream evangelicals are not all in on democratic when it comes to democratic norms and institutions, because they have a greater cause, and that is to restore Christian America, and that's the priority of many.
So, and that's the part where I get concerned in reading your book, because I'm like, okay, they don't see themselves as having a duty to country, but a duty to God, which is a very powerful. Oh, is that God calling, telling us to?
I have no idea what's happened. My apologies.
He was actually he was reaching out to the GOP directly, saying, "That's not what I mean. That's not what I mean."
Music. I didn't mean we needed music in the middle of an interview. My apologies.
So, but to that end, how is it that they came to define a lot of what's happening with the GOP and defining the GOP strategy?
You know, we have to go back in history, and a lot of times in evangelical spaces, especially among critics, I'll hear this narrative that evangelicalism was hijacked by politics, right? This is something that I really push back against, because historically speaking, evangelicals helped create the situation. Evangelicals helped shape the Republican Party as we know it today. When you go back to the 1960s and the 1970s, the moral majority, the rise of the religious right, they were there at the foundations. And so this overlap is very tight. And that's important to realize, that we don't just have to kind of purify evangelicalism, that there's this pure religious, lovely tradition, that we just have to, kind of separate the politics out. But they're just so overlapping that for generations now, conservative evangelicals have really been formed in a way where to be Christian is to be patriotic in this God and country kind of way. To be Christian is to follow certain gender norms, patriarchal authority, female submission, right? To be Christian is to champion Christian America, which is pretty much a white Christian ideal. So race is a part of this as well. And so all of this is kind of packaged and sold just as Christianity, but it really runs deep.
We have, I'm glad you talked about sort of women's roles, and that this is very patriarchal, but women have, they have an active role in this, in that they are there to be the helpers and the supporters, and to build up and protect men's egos. Yes. So 2 questions coming out of it. First, how do you square the circle there, that men have such fragile egos that in order to function, they need the constant reassurance of women? I'm not sure how does that comport with masculinity and male dominance?
Yes. Okay. So we have to go back here. I read a lot of evangelical sex manuals and advice to how to be a good wife.
I was like, wait, hold the phone. Let's start there.
There is so much there, right? These are bestsellers going back to the 1960s, 1970s, all the way up to the present. It's an industry, and yes, it's a wife's job to prop up her husband's ego. And there is a bit of a paradox here, that a man is supposed to be so strong and everything, but masculinity, right? It's under attack. And the source of the attack is, somewhat fluid. So the left, secularists, feminists, and this idea of there was, the good old days when all was right with the world, and men were men, and then things have gone wrong. So we had the 1960s, or if you want to bring race into it too, you have the civil rights movement challenging the authority of Southern white men in particular, right? You had the Vietnam War, and questions about American greatness and goodness, and American men couldn't get it done on the battlefields of Vietnam, right? You have all these challenges going back to that time, and so it did seem like American manhood was under attack, and particularly by liberals, by feminists. And that was a bad thing, because God had created men to be leaders, to be protectors and providers, and because the strength of the American nation depended on the strength of the nation's men, right? It made sense in the Cold War era in particular. And so women needed to fulfill their roles. And that was to not usurp a man's authority. And it was to honor her husband and to fulfill his sexual needs in the bedroom, to prop up his ego so that he had the confidence to fulfill his leadership roles, to defend and protect his faith, his family, and his nation. That's how the logic went.
So it all really falls apart without women. I find it really.
We have to realize our power. Like, that's the thing. It's like,
right. Well, and this is what women were telling each other, right? So women like Maribel Morgan or even Phyllis Schlafly, like, yes, women, you have power. You have a role here to play, and that is a supporting role, but it's an essential supporting role.
So, and the history of this is all like very deep, because when I think about like what would Jesus do, like we think about like all the empathetic traits, right? But in your book, you talk about how there was a stark shift in the 1900s, early 1900s, that shifted the definition of what it meant to be Christian. Can you talk about that a bit?
Yeah, what it means to be Christian, what it means to be a man changes dramatically over time, right? So when we hear people talking, especially in the Republican Party these days, about, masculinity is under siege, or they talk about masculinity as though it's one thing, and we all kind of know what it is. But as a historian, that falls apart immediately, right? Masculinity changes over time. It depends on social class, it depends on race, on region, on which moment in time we're looking at, and so masculinity is very fluid. It changes over time. What we can see is in the 19th century, a lot of evangelicals saw that to be a Christian man was to be a gentleman, to exhibit self-restraint. Right. So very different. And that made sense with the economy at the time. Now, in the American South, you had a more domineering model of white manhood. It was to assert order over women, children, and enslaved people. So you had, again, different masculinities at play. In the early 20th century, you see these kind of come together. This is the Teddy Roosevelt era, this kind of white, rugged masculinity that brings order through violence out in the Wild West, and then on the global stage as well, right? The Rough Rider kind of thing. And you see that take shape, and you see Protestants embrace this kind of muscular Christianity, liberal Protestants and conservative Protestants. And then where things really come together, though, is when this idea of rugged Christian manhood comes together with Christian nationalism. Mm-hmm. And that really, there too, you have some examples of conservative Protestants who are Christian nationalists in the early 20th century, but many who are not, who reject Christian nationalism. And it really is in the early Cold War era where these things come together, where we need this traditional rugged masculinity, patriarchal authority, gender traditionalism, and this militarism, this strong defense of the nation. And we're still very much kind of living in that era today, at least among white conservatives.
Right. And that really ties in to authoritarian movements, that this sense of chaos and change and roles being undefined and waning power of the group that's been in power, bringing order out of that chaos. Yes. Sounds like a common thread between the evangelical current definition of white evangelical current definition of manhood and authoritarianism.
There is a connection. And, when I was researching this book, it was disturbing to run up against that. This was a few years back when I started this, and I wasn't quite sure what to make of this, just how much authority mattered on this hierarchical notion of authority, and how this whole ideology justified righteous violence. Right. Mm-hmm. That the idea that God filled men with testosterone to make them strong, to make them aggressive. And it was their duty to channel that aggression in a way that protected, again, their families and their nation. And so violence was key here, righteous violence. It needed to be controlled. It needed to be contained. And when I hear different figures, even from this last week, talk about masculinity and needing to rescue masculinity from the liberals, from the left. It's placed in this context because we need to defend the nation. We need to stand up. We need to not be compliant, not be tolerant. Men need to have a backbone because they're going to have to fight for their country.
So I'm glad that you mentioned that piece of things, because there was a survey, apparently 30% of Republicans said they agree with the following statement: because things have gotten so far off track, true American patriots may have to resort to violence in order to save our country.
Yes.
So that's not surprising to you.
No, it's not. I've been tracking that survey data as well. And then what defines, so far off track, and we have this kind of litany of things that have gone wrong, and, decline of morality, and, a Democrat in the White House. And this is very much connected to this Stop the Steal campaign too. The idea that this is an illegitimate presidency. And, that is the kind of thing that presumably could justify resorting to violence, right? Violence to save the country.
Sorry. Deep breath. I know.
It's obviously a heavy topic, a heavy conversation to be having, a really important one, but all is not lost. And you've seen positive reaction from interesting places to your book. Can you talk to us about it?
Yeah. So, the book it was described by one reviewer as it's sharp-elbowed and urgent. As the subtitle suggests, how white evangelicals corrupted a faith and fractured a nation. So much to my surprise, white evangelicals are among the book's biggest fans, including conservative white evangelicals. There are many who have read this book, and they write me every day. Still to this day, I get several letters a day from evangelical readers who say, "This is the story of my life. This is true." But I never understood how all these pieces came together. And so there are people who have been complicit in this, who have participated in this culture, who have embraced these ideals, have championed patriarchy. And now the last few years, the last couple of years in particular, I think, have for some white evangelicals led them to a place to say, this isn't really what we meant. This is not what I meant by this. To see that there is a real tension between this kind of warrior Christ and this righteous violence and the Jesus that they read about in the Gospels. To love your neighbor as yourself, to turn the other cheek, to love your enemies. Like, these are core biblical teachings, and they don't mesh very well with this rugged warrior Christ that's being championed in their churches and in their political organizations. So that's actually been a source of encouragement to me to see how many white evangelicals have showed quite a bit of humility and really examined their own complicity in asking not just how could we have thought this, but the follow-up question is why could I have been so comfortable going along with this, seeing how this ideology has done so much harm to our neighbors, to people outside the kind of conservative white Christian communities. And so that's been really encouraging. And right now I can say that white evangelical communities are deeply divided. There are deep tensions within these communities. It's not a 50-50 split, right? It still is majority kind of going along with the Republican Party as day to day. But there is a solid and increasingly vocal minority who is working to resist and to redirect.
And as a part of that, does it look like we're moving towards a future, like for the voices who are dissenting, does it look like we're moving towards a future where there can be a more fluid definition of masculinity so that everybody feels like they belong, that they're a part of the story?
Yeah, there is, first of all, I don't want to be too optimistic because, a lot of sorry, historian here, a lot of the reckoning that I'm seeing is very much on an individual level, and individuals are resisting and they're challenging. And then I'm not seeing much on an institutional or organizational level, much in the way of change. But yes, within evangelical communities, I think right now, very active conversations around masculinity and femininity, around this complementarian ideal that men are to lead and that women are to, this idea of biblical womanhood, that women are to exhibit, they're supposed to be not in the workplace, they're supposed to be in the domestic realm, they're supposed to be submissive, right? It might sound a little jarring to anybody who's not inside these communities, but these are very popular teachings within the conservative Christian world. And right now, there's a lot of conversation around these. A lot of people are questioning these strict gender ideals, both on a personal level and also seeing the interplay between the personal and the political in this particular moment.
Well, I'm so glad that you are out there constantly banging this drum. It's not an easy one to do.
It is not.
But so important. So thank you for coming in and speaking with us tonight and for everything that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. My pleasure.
Yes, thank you so much. I remain hopeful.
I have to.
Yeah, truthfully, I mean, I think part of it is seeing that people want to be happy and authentic, and a lot of people don't fit into these masculinity roles, even within the evangelical faith. And so I think those people who felt that they were always being forced into this box are going, wait a second, there's room for other definitions of masculinity. And so I think what's great about this book is that it talks about that, and that it wasn't always this way. And so that gives to me, that's hope for the future.
It is hope. One of the first shows that we did, we had Ted Bunch from A Call to Men on, which is a really amazing organization that does work with men and boys to develop healthy masculinity. And one of the things that organization talks about is that this definition has not worked well for men.
Exactly.
That man box that they get forced into, that's not a good place for men and boys to be. It's not healthy, and it's confining, and it only allows them to be a tiny piece of who they really are, and very often not the best piece. So I hope we're going to get to a place where people of all genders can be more fully themselves and not pick and choose, the little slices that the group of people that they're with tell them it's okay to be.
I think so. I think we have time for some viewer questions. So we have, here we go. Oh, we're trying to end on a hopeful note. What in the world, Charles? Charles asks my conservative friends, it's okay, we're all thinking the same thing, are convinced we are headed for civil war. I've heard that too from some of my friends from high school. How can I try to convince them that the only real threat to democracy is the Republican Party? Lisa?
Yeah. We talk about this a lot. There are certain, there is the amount that can be accomplished for the amount of effort that goes into it. So pick your battles. There are some folks who are so closed off at this point that don't go there. Don't use your energy to try to convince someone who is not at all open to having the conversation. Mm-hmm. But when you have the opportunity, lean into it some and ask questions. It's an interesting model to just keep questioning someone, like, why do you think that? And try to figure out how they started adopting those views in the first place. Where were they coming from that opened them up to being terrified? And that's what really that's what the right wing is feeding on, is people's fear.
Yeah. Feeling on fear and rage. And so I think the only way to battle that is, yes, the empathy. It's right there on the screen. Write it down, y'all. Empathy, listen, and understand that. I think at the end of the day, and Connie said this, like Connie Schultz said this last week, is we all want to be good people. And in order to do so, we have to dig a little bit deeper and listen and hear what somebody else is saying, because there's always the subtext. And usually the subtext is like, I fear loss of control over my life. And so if you start there, Thanksgiving's coming up. These conversations are probably going to come up. So there, do that. Whew.
Yeah, try doing that. And, one less glass of wine, one last bourbon at Thanksgiving, maybe not the worst idea this year. And for those who celebrate other holidays toward the end of the year after Thanksgiving, whether it's Hanukkah or Christmas, you get another shot. So if Thanksgiving doesn't go so well, don't feel like
baby step your way to bringing it together. You know what I mean? It doesn't have to all happen at Thanksgiving.
That's right.
Baby step.
Everybody's a work in progress. So, baby steps. And we have a year until the midterms. So just work on people slowly. And check out the breakdown tomorrow with Tara Setmayer and Rick Wilson. They are on at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific. And they're going to be joined tomorrow by Fiona Hill, which is going to be a truly don't miss conversation. What an amazing, inspiring, strong woman she is. I'll definitely be tuning in. And don't forget, every Monday we'll be posting on Instagram asking for your questions. So keep an eye on our story and submit your questions for the week ahead. And we will try to fit in as many as we can.
Yes, we will. And stay tuned because we have a message coming up from Lisa about the fight for democracy and what Lincoln Project is doing. So stay tuned for that, and we will see you next week.
Have a great week. Hi, I'm Lisa Senecal from the Lincoln Project. The 2020 elections exposed a major weakness in the Democratic establishment strategy, a weakness we at the Lincoln Project can solve. What the establishment failed to do, and what time and time again has come back and bitten them, was define their opponent early. Our opponents are more sophisticated and better funded than Democrats realize. Democrats can't just turn on the small dollar money cannon in the 11th hour and hope it helps them make up ground. They have to get more proactive because the other side already is. Here at the Lincoln Project, we're ready for the fight. We have to be, and we want you to be part of it. Go to lincolnproject.us to get involved, join the fight, and donate. The stakes have never been higher, and time is running out. But together, we know we can do this. There's no other option. Thank you.